Now, it's a week since the Formula One Grand Prix in Bahrain focused international attention on continued unrest in the kingdom. Channel 4 News was refused journalist visas at the time, so a team went in as tourists. As street protests erupted, they were caught filming and deported before they could file their report. But the footage from that day has now been smuggled out. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller takes up the story.
Bahrain is in turmoil. The Grand Prix is over and the media have moved on, but street battles are daily events now. Bahraini society riven by sectarian fault lines. 2/3 of its people, Shia Muslims, marginalised under the suffocating rule of a Sunni monarchy. Formula One and Bahrain's ruling elite defied calls to cancel this year's Grand Prix. Last year's was called off after a violent crackdown on protests. This day last week, the event was declared a resounding success. The message: Bahrain was open for business again. But those who watched the Grand Prix on TV were not shown how the regime kept protesters at bay. The demonstrators had promised a day of rage, but they found their suburbs and villages completely locked down. We drove from district to district, keeping our heads down. In the village of Karana, we ran into a flash protest. The police tactic: to break up these illegal gatherings by firing tear gas and shotguns before they reach critical mass.
This guy's showing us where he's been shot in the leg. There's a helicopter overhead up here. They're getting quite anxious. They can't really stick around very long because the police are cruising these neighbourhoods.
The protesters' front line just a couple of streets away. Over the months, hundreds of Bahrainis have been injured, some even killed by tear gas and tear gas canisters used by police as a weapon. I'm with my Channel 4 News crew, Ali, our driver, and Dr. Allah Shahabi, a British Bahraini human rights activist.
Okay, it seems that what's happened is that this man was at the front of the protest and has got some sort of respiratory problem and inhaled too much tear gas and passed out. But of course, he can't go to hospital, and there are no doctors to treat him. So this is one of the problems that the demonstrators here face. It's too dangerous to go to state-run hospitals.
Passions were running high on the streets. A prominent protest leader, Salah Abbas Habib, had been shot and killed, apparently by police 2 days earlier. The night before the big race, we went to see his family. The village Salah's family lived in was eerily quiet. There had been running battles in these streets just hours earlier. 20 of them, crammed into one small house. This is Salah's widowed father. His son, he told me, was the family's sole breadwinner. Salah had a wife and 5 children too. The contrast with the Grand Prix glitz across town was stark.
Do you blame the Formula One racing for his death? Yes.
This family steeped in rebellion. 3 of them have spent time in jail, and all for demanding democracy.
Most of us Bahraini Shia can't earn much, but Sunnis are guaranteed all the best jobs as soon as they leave college. The government looks after everything for them.
And it's this sense of deep-seated injustice that's finding expression on the streets, despite government efforts on Grand Prix Day to stop it.
People are just left burning, setting up fires inside the middle of the villages because of checkpoints that have been set up and because of APCs that have been deployed across almost on every single village entrance. And this is a way that the government has sabotaged its own event.
Every minute we spent here was a minute too long. We'd been spotted by the police helicopter, which directed police on the ground, and after a car chase, we were surrounded and arrested. I spoke to Channel 4 News from the back of the police van.
We are operating without accreditation, and so when we were caught, they have not been particularly pleasant.
Do they know you're doing this interview? Are they listening to you now?
No, they're not aware of the fact that I'm talking to the programme, no.
After a few hours in custody, we were deported. Most Bahraini Shia are trapped on their island, ruled by a king who promises change and reform, but never delivers.
Well, with Jonathan when he was arrested were his driver Ali and the human rights activist you saw, Dr. Allah Shahabi. Both were released by the Bahraini authorities, and Dr. Shahabi, who has dual citizenship in Bahrain and Britain, is with me now. And so where does the protest movement go?
Well, the protests have been unabated. They've been happening across the whole country, and they've continued. The funeral of Salah Abbas was attended by over 50,000 protesters and was again repressed by police with tear gas and stun grenades and birdshot pellets.
But how do you see this breaking through? I mean, you know, the last time there was a real threat, Saudi vehicles rolled in. You don't have the organisation or the funding or the backing that other protest movements have had. I mean, you can't win, can you?
Well, this all depends on the international dimension around the conflict. With the silence of the Western governments over the continued repression in Bahrain, we're not going to see any solution over the horizon. And that's the danger, that it enters into a stalemate and it continues to go downhill. Things are unravelling and unfolding on a dangerous scale at the moment. An MP's house was gunned down. His business was gunned down by government loyalists because he actually stood up in Parliament to question the authority of the Prime Minister, who's been in power for 41 years.
I mean, the Bahraini government, you know, come out, they've done this on this programme and say we're engaging, we're talking, you know, we are interested in human rights. Is there any sort of political solution possible?
Well, the ball's in the government's courts. The solution is with them. They need to decide whether they engage with the people and respond to the democratic demands of the majority of the people.
But when they say they are doing that, why do you say actually they're not?
How is that possible if no one sat around the table, if they haven't taken actual steps towards a democratic reform? There's nothing over the past year that indicates that they are genuine and serious in moving towards a democracy.
And what do you say to those people who worry that there would be an onslaught on the Sunnis who are currently in power if there was a revolution?
Well, there's been revolution elsewhere, and we haven't seen that onslaught. With democratic development, everyone will get equal rights. In fact, the current state is unsustainable because more than half of the population are being repressed and are dying, and the death toll is increasing. So the solution is to find a settlement that will appease the majority of the people, because either way, Sunnis are losing just as much as the Shia with the current crisis.
Dr. Shahabi, thank you very much for joining us. Some breaking sports news, actually, before we go. In the last few minutes, West Bromwich Albion have confirmed they've given permission for the FA to speak to Roy Hodgson over the England manager's job. The FA confirmed they have approached Hodgson, the only candidate to be approached so far. You can reach me direct on Twitter @ChrisGM. We're back tomorrow at 7. Until then, that is Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.